Introducing you.
There's a children's boutique in Chicago called KIDO. The owner, Kiwa Nurula, was inspired to open it after she realized a cultural gap missing in clothing and accessories for her young son. She also noticed that books that were available to the public were not inclusive or diverse enough for her family.
And I just was thinking, this precious little boy, this precious little brown boy, should have options that are full of color and inspiration.
I'm Eddie Robinson, and stay tuned as we chat unguarded with the owner and founder of the award-winning boutique, KIDO, Kiwa Nurula. She's also a fourth-generation entrepreneur, as her great-grandfather owned a business that was part of Black Wall Street, a thriving Tulsa, Oklahoma business community in the early 20th century. Oh yeah, I feel you. We hear you. I see you. You're listening to I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson. Inclusion and representation matter. These words I hardly knew about growing up in the early 70s in rural Mississippi. When a child sees himself or herself in a book, as a character in a movie or a stage play, it motivates them, it inspires them. It literally can transform their lives into becoming the hero or shero they never knew lived inside of them. And that's why it's important to start early. And so we're so grateful to have with us owner and founder of KIDO, a kids boutique in Chicago, Kiwa Nurula. She's a generation of four-generation Black entrepreneur, as her great-grandfather owned a tailor shop on Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He and his family, of course, were impacted by the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. We'll be sure to get her to spill some tea about how they managed to flee and escape to Chicago later. But she's a married mom of two, a son and a daughter. Kiwa curates the shop, drives the vision. Her husband, Doug, designs prints for shirts. Cousin Amanda is a digital media guru and customer service extraordinaire. And Grandmama Shanta even teaches music classes for the KIDO community. It's a KIDO family affair. And we're so grateful and honored to have Kiwa Nurula to the show. Miss Kiwa, thank you so much for being a guest on ICU.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
You opened the door of KIDO back in 2016?
We started online in 2016, and in 2018, we opened our storefront. Yeah.
Interesting. And for those who are still, wondering what the shop offers up, it's more than just color diversity, but inclusive offerings really matter, right? When you start introducing toy characters and toys and books that feature characters who may be experiencing a disability, neurodivergence, brain disorders, differences when it comes to limbs and body parts, Down's syndrome, anxiety, vitiligo, even pet characters. Tell us more about what KIDO Chicago is all about and what does it offer up in terms of services and items that you sell at this boutique?
Well, KIDO really started out with filling a gap for my own children. I didn't grow up with a lot of, little cousins or younger siblings or, not really knowing anything about babies and kid stuff until I had my son. And when I had him and I was shopping for just the basic things, clothing, toys, and accessories, I was really surprised at how he wasn't really represented out there. I was looking for clothing that matched our style, our values, and the quality that we wanted, and I wasn't finding it. And so that got the spark going. And then from there, I thought, well, what do I want to see? And I started coming up with ideas for that. And I was just surprised, when you shop for little boys, you see all these things that say, Daddy's little slugger. And, I even saw a onesie one time that said, somebody go grab my dad a beer. And I'm just like, on a little baby, what's going on? it just wasn't my style. It wasn't what I was into. And I just was thinking, this precious little boy, this precious little brown boy should have options that are full of color and inspiration and things that people would see on a little baby and go, "Oh my God, my heart, how sweet," And so that's where my ideas really started. And and so I've just taken it from there. I think as we've grown Kiddo,
Yeah.
we started having events to really connect with the community, story times and family day parties and Spanish music events. And that's when I really meet the families that are like mine who echo, what I want and say, we're looking for this too. We need more things on the south side of Chicago, or we need more clothing that has little black boys on it, or whatever my community is saying, I'm listening and taking note. And so when we opened the storefront, it really was kind of a representation of, this is what I've heard from my people and my community, and this is my offering. And as we've grown, I've just been able to offer more and more and more.
And it's beautiful too, because as a single gay man with a 14-month-old myself, through
Oh,
surrogacy.
I didn't know.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I know exactly what you mean when it comes to trying to shop for this kiddo. And he
Hmm.
is, all I see is football and things of that nature as it relates to dad and and I'm sure
Hmm.
there's men out there who raise their kids on their own, and it's hard for me to find
Hmm.
books or toys or something as it relates to a son, trying to find something for a little boy. And so representation and diversity really does matter, right, Ms. Kiwa? Tell us more about the importance of offerings that are inclusive.
What I found out since I started Kiddo is really interesting, because social media gives us the gift of being amplified to communities other than my own. We have Kiddo fans from around the country and around the world. And what I know is that even though I'm personally working from a place that's filling a need on the south side of Chicago, because that's where I'm from, I find that in doing that, I'm connecting with people who are in other communities around the country where there may be no Black people at all. You may have multiracial families or even white parents raising Black children in communities where there are no Black people. So where do they go? So they go on the internet and they find this store in Chicago that is speaking to them. Even though it's not where they are, we're speaking to them as well. And the kids that come in the shop, I'm just always thinking of them and how powerful it is when they come in the shop and they gasp or they run towards a particular book and say, "Mommy, that's me." And it's not them, but it's some little boy or little girl who looks enough like them where they light up and they feel inspired just by seeing themselves represented out in the world. We have kids that come in that have physical disabilities. One of my favorite Kiddo kids, who's so bright and magnetic and wonderful, is blind and goes to the blind school. That's not too far from the store. We have kids whose parents are incarcerated, or they are with a foster
Oh, wow.
family, or they're dealing with immediate family who have passed away, and some heavy things. And just to be able to not just have a product, but start a conversation in my store that lets them know that this larger community that they're a part of cares about them and sees them and acknowledges them and wants them to be inspired.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with Kiwa Nurula. She's the owner of Kiddo, an award-winning kids boutique out in Chicago. It's a place that's known around the country as a diverse kids boutique, as she's been seen on both national and local media outlets from her native Chicago area. She's also a fourth-generation Black entrepreneur, which we'll get into in a minute. We're connecting with Miss Kiwa about the importance of representation and inclusion, whether it be in toys, books, clothing, the media, as well as the powerful effect that it has on children, even on young adults. Does Kiddo offer up or display banned books inside your boutique, books and publications that have been removed across the country or taken out of school curriculum based on its content? Does your store offer up any of those kinds of books for purchase?
We sure do. We love banned books.
Wow.
We love banned books. I wouldn't even say I'm a rebel, but I know I am. I know
Oh,
I'm a rebel. I don't believe that people should filter perspectives for children that they're ready for and that they need to know. I could have a whole other conversation about that, but being that KIDO is my business and I thankfully get to do what I want and carry what I want, those are the books that I want. There are children who, there are people making laws out of some ideology of things that, well, what if?
right.
And it's not about the what if, it's about what's actually happening. If there's a child who has two dads or two moms, they are living that life and they want to know more about it and have things that affirm their situation and their joy or their love in their family. And so if you're creating laws based about a what if for somebody who's not even in that situation, I don't care about that. At KIDO, I'm speaking to the child who either is needing to be affirmed or the children who need to learn about their neighbor and their friend who's in that situation. It's all about part of it is the affirmation, and then part of it is for all of us who need to learn more to make everyone feel loved. And that's all that I care about. If there were a law that told me I couldn't sell these books in my store, then I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But for now, I'm selling what I want, and people seem to also want it,
Interestingly enough, do you think in your heart of hearts, if a law like that were to happen, how would you feel about that?
The same way that I feel about some things going on right now in this country. But there would probably be a KIDO Underground Railroad of books, and we would just have to, it would be like prohibition.
KIDO Underground.
We would just be sliding books behind secret doorways or whatever. I hope it would never get to that position, but I do feel like as a leader in my community, I have the responsibility to do what's right. And sometimes people in higher positions of authority are clouded by corruption and money and things, and they're not doing what's right all the time. And so I feel like my inner compass leads me to do what's right, and that's all I'm worried about.
Coming up, we continue our chat with Kiwa Nurula, owner of KIDO, a diverse children's boutique in Chicago. We'll gain more insight into what happens when kids become exposed to different experiences and people. Might some parents get intimidated by this? Plus, we find out details about her family's escape after Black Wall Street, the once booming Tulsa, Oklahoma business district that was burned to the ground and destroyed in the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Who helped usher her relatives to safety? Then later, Kiwa makes an interesting statement about her pursuit for a career in the performing arts.
Sometimes I feel like I was robbed of something extra that a lot of white people who inherit rich legacies know from the moment they're born.
I'm Eddie Robinson. Don't miss our second segment of ICU. It comes your way right after this. We'll be right back. If you're enjoying this program, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, ICU with Eddie Robinson. You can hear all the past episodes and be notified when new episodes are released. Also, please take a minute to give us a review or comment. We love getting feedback from our listeners. It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with Kiwa Nurula. She's the owner of KIDO, an award-winning kids boutique in Chicago. She's also a fourth-generation Black entrepreneur, which we'll get into in a minute. We're connecting with Ms. Kiwa about the importance of representation and inclusion, whether it be in toys, books, clothing, the media, as well as the powerful effect that it has on children and even young adults. Have you experienced or received any backlash, Ms. Keywell, related to selling certain books that have been banned?
Oh yeah, not
Oh,
not much, but
okay.
unfortunately, whenever Kiddo gets a feature in the press or is
Mm,
whenever our mission is kind of amplified for other people outside of our community to find out about it, there are always trolls and people who email
hmm.
or leave a review saying, you shouldn't sell trans books. You're being
Okay.
that kind of message that doesn't need to be repeated. But it's funny because I posted on social media and said, "Hey, kiddo family, look at this review we got," and they go in. We counter that with
Interesting.
so much positivity, and they're like, "We love you. These people are nothing," and so I don't usually acknowledge it, but whenever I do, I know that our customer and our community is right there with us, and they
Yeah.
smash the hate and they send out the positivity.
Well, I mean, that interests me because I'm wondering, even as you were conceptualizing the boutique, were there any roadblocks? What were some of the challenges that you all ran into as it relates to just putting Kiddo together?
Well, it's interesting because when we opened in 2018, this was before the pandemic and before the civil unrest
That's
that
right.
sparked from George Floyd and all of that. And so I know that when I started Kiddo, I heard about, there's always been this thing with Black businesses where some of us have felt that we needed to hide that from our consumer in order
Interesting.
to be successful. And some of us feel comfortable leading with that, knowing that people, that our customer will find us regardless.
Yes.
I don't judge people either way. And it sometimes depends on what industry you're in. But for me, I've always thought, that's just part of it. If you want to shop at Kiddo, we don't want the hate, So if there's a
Okay.
customer that sees who owns the store and you don't want our product, then we don't want you. We don't want you either. So I've
Sure.
never been one to hide, but even when we were starting Kiddo, I knew that if we want to change the world starting with the littlest people, then we have to speak to our community in a way that draws the parents in order to create that change. And so if you're a parent that doesn't want to change, it's going to be hard to receive our message. But if you're a parent who maybe grew up in a way that you don't want to pass on to your kid and you see Kiddo and you're like, maybe this is how I can do it, then we're here for you.
Well, as a mother yourself, describe for us what can go wrong for a student or a child when he or she isn't exposed to someone who's different. For instance, I found an article from a media outlet recently that performed a public request to nearly 100 school districts across Texas, including Houston. And they found almost 90 formal requests from parents to remove books, from their libraries. And this was in 2021. Some reasons stemmed from these books would lead them to question their sexual orientation, to books that opines prejudice based on race. Certain parents felt that sensitive or controversial topics about gender and sexuality should not be discussed. There was a Houston parent that said that a novel about a black boy who was killed by police might cause white children to feel ashamed based on the color of their skin. And these parents are adamant. They're very adamant about this. What do you make of it? What do you think this says about the country we live in? Or perhaps describe for us, like I said, what can go wrong for a student or child when he or she isn't exposed to someone who's different?
Unfortunately, I think the children are ready for it.
Ah,
I think the children want it. I think the children are not scared, and I think the children have been exposed to enough to where they're smart enough to decipher, what's for them or what's not. And unfortunately, the parents, we've been raised in previous generations or maybe raised under certain religions that really, cloud that type of thinking.
sure.
But It's really sad because what I do know is that, especially because I lived in New York City for a long time, just like you have a lot of people who flee to New York because they're running away from parts of the country that do not accept them for what they are. And it's unfortunate because some of those same parents who are writing the school district to ban books, some of their kids will run away from them. And that's none of my concern, but that's simply what's happening. You know, if you fill your house with hate or you justify hate with these different things, it might be your own child who decides that they don't want to live in that hateful environment. And that's just the way it is. You can't, you know, I know as a parent, I don't have control over, I am trying to guide my children, but I don't have control over who they'll turn out to be. And some people don't believe that. Some people really think that they can make their child become, you know, this or that based on what they do. And that's just simply not the case. So I feel guided by the children. I feel like my work with KIDO is motivated by what they need. Because in some respects, our generation and above, we might be a lost cause. But I'm trying to speak to them because I know they have the potential to change and to be great.
Speaking of sticking with the children, you've created this great space for children, including for your own, you know, to embrace differences and see themselves represented in the clothing and the books that are offered at KIDO. How old are they now? 4 or?
They are 4 and 6.
4 and 6. Now, when your children are out in places that don't reflect that same diversity, that same sense of inclusion, perhaps it's at a big name store or anywhere that might not offer up inclusive items for purchase, do they notice? You know, do you notice their reaction? You know, what's that been like for you?
Oh, that's hard to navigate. You know, right now, my children go to a PWI, a primarily white institution, and that may not always be the case, but right now they do. And my little radars are always up.
Yes.
I am not
Interesting.
a parent that's just going to sit back and see what happens. I'm proactive. I'm in the classroom. I'm reading books about Kwanzaa and telling the class how we celebrate and what our family does and how our family looks and the history of our family, because I know that my children, the age they are, they can't really vocalize or explain everything. They don't have the words for it yet, and they don't have the confidence to do so yet.
Sure.
But if I can come in the classroom or my husband and just let these children see, they may live in another neighborhood in Chicago where there aren't many Black people, but they know Faraz's mom and dad and what they look like. And, oh, they're cool, and they dress like that, and they talk about Transformers and Legos, and we love Transformers and Legos. And so we can bridge the gap as much as we can just by being active and proactive in their lives and visible at the school. And that's really it. You know, I'm always in conversation with their teachers and with the administrators. You know, what can we do? How can we participate? Because those small things might change the culture, you know, at the school. Yeah, just hoping that all those little instances of us being present and being confident about our culture will permeate and affect our children so that they feel confident when it's time for them to do so.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with Kiwa Newrala. She's the owner of KIDO, an award-winning kids boutique in Chicago. Now, the shop is known as a diverse kids boutique that offers up books, toys, clothing that are unique, sustainable, and inclusive. She's also a fourth-generation Black entrepreneur, as her great-grandfather owned a tailor shop on Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Speaking of which, Ms. Kiwa, really kind of spill the tea. How did they escape, you know, from what oral history you've heard that's been passed down from generation to generation, because we didn't hear about any of this in schools. You know, what happened as they were fleeing? Go.
Oh my goodness, it's so juicy, and it really is tea. It really is the tea of the day. I would say it's the peppermint tea. It's gonna open you up, you know.
Okay. Let's hear it.
The story that we've heard is that when things erupted, when when the town was going up in flames, when people were running for their lives, my great-grandparents decided that they were going to try to leave. Not everybody did that. People tried to huddle up in the nearest gymnasium or, do other things, but they decided they wanted to or needed to get out of town. And when they decided to do that, they didn't really know how it was going to happen. But what happened was, as they were making their way out, a customer of my great-grandfather's offered up help, and he hid the family in a truck or wagon underneath some bales of hay, and they were able to escape. Because of those details, we conclude that customer was probably white.
Interesting.
Because why would they be able to make it out, and why would they be hiding in the truck if it were just another Black person? Because they would be in danger as well.
Right.
And so that's what I've concluded. And what we don't know is if that person ushered them just out of the city limits and then they had to make their way, or how far they were able to help them.
Mm-hmm.
But they got out and they eventually made their way to Chicago, to the south side of Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah, and so thankfully, once they were settled and once they were able to get housing and that type of thing, my great-grandfather was able to eventually reopen a tailor shop in Chicago. And then at one point in time, after he had taught my grandfather the trade, and my grandfather returned from being a tailor in World War II, he returned, and at one time they both had tailor shops open on the south side of Chicago. One of them had a tailor shop on 47th Street and one was on 63rd Street.
I have to ask you that when you realized that you didn't hear about this story while you were in school with Tulsa and the Tulsa massacre and the whole thing, how did that make you feel? I mean, like, did it somehow confuse you as to why certain aspects of American history wasn't being taught in schools or in your school, that this history actually involved members of your family? I mean, that was mind-blowing if I could kind of think about it.
It is mind-blowing. I think for two reasons. One is that I was a really good student, and I was very active in school, and I was the one who was asking the questions, because my parents thankfully supplemented our education with all the Black people education, so they were part of a strong kind of Pan-Africanism movement in Chicago. And so once I was in the public school system, they knew that we weren't going to get the whole story. So all of our books at home were kind of supplementing what we weren't finding out, However, that being said, I still didn't realize that my family history of Black Wall Street was important. I didn't know, it's like, this is the comparison I use. If you have a diamond, but nobody knows what a diamond is, and so you're walking around knowing you have this rock that your grandfather gave you, but the value of it is determined by these other things. And so I knew that this is my family history, but if this is my family history and literally nobody else knows about it, you grow up not feeling like it's important. It's just like your family history, and everybody has a family history. Now, as we start to find out more about Black Wall Street and the importance and the kind of how special it was compared to what was going on in America as a whole, sometimes I do feel like I was robbed. What if I had lived my whole childhood knowing how special that was? What if I had grown up feeling like I had the potential to be an entrepreneur or a business owner, like from jump? What if as a kid I was having ideas about having this business or that business because I knew how special it was? I didn't know. And so it's wild to think how thankfully at some point that kicked in, but it's unfortunate that me and my family members were kind of robbed of that, the privilege of knowing that your people were part of something, really important and special. And so it really is a trip, because to know that kids, even in Tulsa itself, were not getting taught the history of Greenwood and Black Wall Street shows you how intentional When people are banning books and when people are making these laws, that's it. That's it. We're going to make you believe it never happened, and that's going to rob you of these things that make you special. And so that's it right there. We're not for future generations. We're not going off that.
And it felt deliberate that much of this history was erased. Did the not knowing about any of this in school, but knowing about this from relatives and family members, help build upon this sense of motivation for you to become an entrepreneur at a young age? Perhaps not. I mean, I got the impression that you wanted to be a performer, a singer. I mean, what was going on there as it relates to your interest and your sort of passions early in life?
Yeah, my parents are both artists. And so even though my grandfather and great grandfather on my mother's side were entrepreneurs, coming directly from my parents, the thing I felt most was my creativity. Now, mind you, if I knew about my history and that could have combined with the entrepreneurship gene earlier on, but I think just starting off, in my parents' household and with their direct influence, the thing I felt most was my creative gene.
Sure.
And I don't have any regrets, and I don't think that anything in my life has happened that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But I do feel like sometimes I feel like I was robbed of something extra that a lot of white people who inherit rich legacies know from the moment they're born, and I'm lucky to now know, I think, but I just wish that every member of my family felt that importance. Like, it's an important time in United States history.
That's right.
I wish we felt the weight of that,
Yes.
through our whole lifetime.
Coming up, we wrap up our chat with Kiwa Nurula, the owner of KIDO, a diverse kids boutique in Chicago's South Loop. We'll learn more about her interest in pursuing that performing arts career. How did that experience as a Black performer impact her life? Plus, with her ancestral connection to Tulsa, Oklahoma's Greenwood district, how is she embracing this entrepreneurial spirit that's part of her DNA? I'm Eddie Robinson. Our final segment of ICU happens in just a moment. We'll be right back.
If you're enjoying this program, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, ICU with Eddie Robinson. You can hear all the past episodes and be notified when new episodes are released. Also, please take a minute to give us a review or comment. We love getting feedback from our listeners. You're listening to ICU. I'm your host, Eddie Robinson. We've been chatting with Kiwa Nurula, a retired Disney princess. She's now the owner of a diverse and inclusive kids boutique out in Chicago. It's called KIDO. You can learn more about her very popular Black-owned boutique by heading over to KIDOChicago.com. Ms. Kiwa, you had a career in the performing arts, and I'm curious if you've ever had any hopes of hitting Broadway, becoming an actress. When Princess and the Frog came out, you were one of Disney World's first representations of a Black princess.
Oh, nice to kiss.
Excuse me?
Please, princess. It will make me human again.
Just one kiss.
Unless you beg for more.
How important was that time for you? As I'm curious as to whether or not this experience may have even sparked your desire, your interest, your curiosity to focus more on inclusivity.
Definitely. I feel like even in the first chapter of my adult life and career, when I was pursuing the performing arts with much rigor, even that was all about representation.
Sure.
I remember the first time I went to see like a touring Broadway show in Chicago, and there was only one Black woman on stage, and she was dancing and singing, and I zoned in on her. And that started the wheels of, okay, well, this kind of puts together everything I like to do. I like to sing, I like to dance, and there she is, and she's doing it, you know?
Yes,
And
yes.
so once I became a professional, the very first show that I toured with after college, I was the only Black woman. All the
Right,
shows in the week, I was the
right.
person of color on stage, and I would get kids at the stage door, little
Oh,
Black boys and girls who wanted my autograph specifically, even though I wasn't the lead in the show, but because I was the person who they saw on the stage, who they connected to.
there you go.
And what's funny enough is that I was the understudy for the lead role, and the first week that I went on for the lead role
Hmm.
was in Houston. It was in Houston, and
Wow.
so I'm the only person of color in the cast. I'm going on for the lead role. At the end of the show, there's a kiss, and I kissed the white male lead. And I remember very specifically there were gasps in the audience. And I'm thinking, what year is this? This is 2000. And I just knew where I was. I knew where I was. I knew what it is, you know. And
Interesting.
yet there were still little girls coming to the stage door and wanting the autograph of this performer they never heard of, but they saw the show, they enjoyed, and they saw me doing what they wanted to do. And so, you know, I've done countless shows, I think because of my style of performance, where I was the only one, or I was the token, or at my audition, it's down to the final call and I'm the only Black girl, you know, around. And I got used to it, but
Interesting.
it's still important.
Yes.
Representation is still important. So by the time I got to Disneyland, by the time I made it out west, I knew the movie was coming out, and you know, in my wildest dreams, I would have been Princess Tiana, but of course they want a superstar, so they went with Anika Noni Rose. However, there was
Shout
still
out
a chance for
Anika.
me. I know she's amazing.
She's amazing. Yes, I love
it's not
her.
like I would have ever gotten an audition, but I remember having that feeling of, you know, any kid who's grown up with these Disney movies and singing their heart out to Little Mermaid and Lion King, it would be your wildest dream to be the
Exactly.
voice of a Disney princess. So
Exactly.
that's, you know, that's the love for doing what I do. But when I saw the audition notice to be a representation of Princess Tiana at Disney, I was like, well, this is the next best thing, you know? And surely enough, I was part of that first cast, and it was live singing. I'm singing all the songs, and I'm wearing the ball gown and the tiara and all of that. And there would be grown people coming up to me crying, just the fandom of meeting the first Black princess in person was something that I'll never forget. So at every stage in my life, like, representation has been so important. And I've had so many moments that I've been impacted by not only my representation for someone else, but providing the representation with KIDO.
Sure.
There's nobody who could argue with me saying that we don't need to do this or that, because I've seen it firsthand throughout my whole life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And look, you're an extension of Black history in its most prosperous time, right? In one of the most flourishing, thriving moments ever for a Black commercial district whose buildings belong to Black Americans. They own businesses, stores, banks, libraries, one of the most affluent African-American communities in the country during that era. You know, how does that make you feel? You know, now as a proud owner of KIDO, an award-winning boutique in Chicago that represents diversity and inclusion, and having that fabric of history a part of your DNA.
It's so important, and I hope that my children and their children feel the importance of that.
Yes.
I mean, no Black person in this country can make you feel the weight of so many of us not knowing where we come from beyond a certain point. And some people don't even know where they come from to where we can track our family.
That's right.
So it's a privilege just to know. And so then to know who you come from and know that they were part of this ecosystem that was so great and high functioning, and I can't even describe the importance of that and how privileged I feel just to know, and then to know that that's in my blood is like, you know, the potential of your power. You just know what you're made of and what you can do in this world. And that's a lot. There are a lot of people who operate from the place of not knowing, and they get lost. And so I feel like I'll never be lost because I know where I come from. And so I know where I can go.
You know, customers from all over, not just Chicago, but from everywhere. They have this incredible shopping experience online. That's really important. And that's what matters, especially as it relates to technology and making things quicker and convenient and efficiently for someone to receive it, you know, for the year 2023 and beyond. Kudos for KIDO on the digital front there.
It's interesting because when you talk to Black people, you know that shopping with Black businesses has good reputation and bad reputation. And even the bad reputations for Black businesses, I oftentimes feel is unfair. You know, like myself, I think a lot of Black business owners are operating from a place where they don't necessarily have business education, but they have the people they know and something they provide, a service. And so we have figured out how to make it happen. Okay. We don't have the privilege of having, all the time information passed down from previous generations, or a trust for when you open your business, you'll have this money available to you. Yeah. And so we're winging it and figuring it out. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with a Black business, some people like to rule us out, after they have one bad experience, or once they figure out that, this is that type of Black-owned business. And I really do feel a responsibility to give the quality of service to my community that we deserve. And for the people who aren't able to provide that, I wish that we just had some kind of resource for everybody to get on the same page. But I definitely I encourage people to have grace and patience with Black-owned businesses. We're just trying to serve our community, the best way that we can. And so I just try to learn everything I can learn and get better with time. But I definitely, even in the space and how it's laid out, and it's bright and colorful and big and full of Black and brown faces, and I want our community to know that we deserve that.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson. We're speaking with Kiwa Nurula. She's the owner of KIDO, a unique, diverse, award-winning kids boutique in Chicago that sells books, toys, clothing, a product that you can feel good about, according to her website, KIDOChicago.com. We're connecting with Ms. Kiwa about the importance of representation and inclusion, whether it be in toys, whether it be in clothing, books, the media, and the powerful effect that it has on children and on young adults. Well, Ms. Kiwa, look, upon first opening KIDO, did you run? You kind of tapped on it at the very beginning, but I want to kind of dive deeper. Did you run into a problem or concern of encouraging African Americans to support your business? Look, with the exception of the coronavirus pandemic, I think businesses all over suffered, and some of them are continuing to suffer because of the pandemic, and it just made matters even worse. But what do you think causes the dearth of some Black-owned businesses? Do you think many of them were or less successful than white-owned businesses?
Oh, definitely. There's tons of data out there to support it. I couldn't speak the statistics, and be right about the numbers, but we're operating at a deficit. Systemic racism pours into every avenue of this country. And so when you have access to capital, you have room for mistakes. Something could happen, you've got the insurance, you've got a certain amount in the bank where you can fix what was damaged in the flood or whatever. And a lot of Black businesses don't even have access to the right amount of capital that they need for their business. And so in the daily and weekly functioning of their business, they have to make all kind of compromises just to make it work. Either you don't have enough employees, or you don't have enough stock, or you don't have a customer service person, so I'm going to handle it when I can.
Sure.
You know, we have all of these things that might not be ideal for running a business,
Sure.
but we try to make it work because we are important to our community. And if we didn't exist, we've all driven through Black neighborhoods that have been ignored and abandoned, and their empty lots and their liquor stores and their gas stations owned by people who don't live in the community. And so if you are a Black person in your community who has a business and you're trying to make it work, you're going to do so by any means. And sometimes the level of the standard of quality of your service may fall a bit. And I really hate when people don't give grace or are so judgmental for businesses who they have a bad experience, because it's like, put the shoe on the other foot. Could you do it? Could you run this? Do you know how to run a business? Do you know, people are just so judgmental. Like, it's a restaurant and you can cook. So you think you could judge that restaurant like, oh, well, if it was me. And it's like, no, there's so much more that goes into running a restaurant besides the food. And so if you have a bad experience, it could be for any reason. It could be, like I said, because there was a flood the night before, or someone who broke in and stole this piece of equipment. And there's just so many things that go into the life of a business owner that I wish people weren't so much more judgmental for Black business owners, because we're the ones at more of a deficit to have the resources to fix those issues.
Amen. And my mother would go crazy. She'd be agreeing with you left and right. She's a Black female entrepreneur herself in Mississippi and trying her best to try to figure out ways to get more Blacks through the door of her business. Do you think with new market demands and trends as it relates to these offerings that subscribe to the notions of inclusion and diversity, do you think this will lead to more business owners looking to consider, producing toys and clothing for kids that are more inclusive? Or, will it just depend on your location? What about KIDO Birmingham, KIDO, Houston, although it's a daycare center? But, why can't we find business owners that can perhaps offer up these kinds of stores in those areas? Do you think that'll happen?
I think that when it comes to that kind of substantial growth and expansion, people who are able to franchise their idea, it's so few and far between because of that key factor, which is the access to capital.
There it is.
It's less than 1% of Black women who are given venture capital funding. I don't know what the statistic is for Black men, but for all people of color in general and women, it's so small that to expand a company all over the country, you just need a certain amount of money. Yeah. You need a certain amount of money. It's not what can come from what you make every day and what's in the bank and kind of what's rotating for your weekly routine. It's so much more than that, to build and grow and scale. And that's kind of the crux where I am right now. It's like we're in this transition of going to the next level of business ownership, and it's scary. It really is scary. I'm somebody who didn't grow up with a lot of money. I would say that I grew up poor, but I know there are a lot of people who grew up with less than I had. There are levels to this. There are levels to poverty.
Got it.
But all that being said, I know that we didn't have a lot of money. And so my whole thought process when it comes to money is different from somebody who always had it.
Sure.
And so even at this age, even at this stage of KIDO, I still have this part in the back of my brain that has this fear related to money that I don't know if it will go away. And so many Black business owners are operating from that mindset of, I have more than I ever have had. What do I do? And that affects your whole mentality. These guys in Silicon Valley who are making these big deals for some idea that they've had that they haven't even proven yet. They operate out of this confidence that is without regards to money, that most Black people don't have the fortune or the privilege to do. It's just a different thing. And so I hope that with my KIDO journey that I'm able to take it to that next level and succeed, so that I give people so that I inspire people to follow in those footsteps or to develop their idea to do the same thing. I think just the more of us that continue on, the more people that will like follow behind and say, okay, well, it's possible for her and him. Let's go for it, you know?
Final question. Of all that you've accomplished in life, being a mother, owning an award-winning boutique for kids. By the way, how do you juggle work and parenthood? You've got to write a book about that and then sell it in KIDO. But, you know, of all that you've accomplished, you know, what you've had to endure as a Black entrepreneur, what lessons have you learned about yourself thus far?
A few things come to mind. One is that you don't know what's in store. And no matter what you plan for, you don't know. So it's like a rhythm of operating with blind faith, of putting in the work to achieve your goals. And I don't really know how to put that in a nice little package of wording, but it really is about putting in the work with an idea of what you want, but being flexible enough to be open to what happens instead.
She's the owner of KIDO, a unique shop and award-winning kids boutique in Chicago, and they're known for their diverse books, toys, and clothing that are unique, sustainable, and inclusive. Ms. Kiwa, thank you so much for being a guest on ICU. We really appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our team includes technical director Todd Holzlander, producer Laura Walker, editors Mark DeClaudio and John Mitchell Good. ICU is a production of Houston Public Media. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen and download your favorite shows. I'm your host and executive producer, Eddie Robinson. And I feel you. We hear you. I see you. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.